Okay, we have more copies of the lesson material that takes you through um, basically next week. So we'll have more out, God willing, next week for you to pick up. I guess my goal would be to at least get a packet for October out there. Might use a different color just so it's easy to differentiate. But there are extra copies right outside on that center table between the two sets of double doors. You don't have to turn to Daniel yet. I'm just going to flash a couple of passages up here, hopefully. There we go. You'll remember if you've been looking at the material that I put some memory work in there. After what I talked about Sunday night, it seems wrong not to at least in passing note, hey, you are challenged in love to commit these verses to memory. This one isn't even a full verse, okay? There's no rule that says you have to memorize an entire verse. I've just picked out a portion of Daniel 1 and verse 8. It's a significant portion of Daniel. It's all significant, I understand that. But Daniel 1 and verse 8 says, "But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself." And that expression translates. Now, in his case, he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or the wine which he drank. And so he seeks permission, favor from the commander of the officials that he may not defile himself. So there's a contextual description there in the remainder of verse 8. But that's a thought worth committing to memory. Daniel's an example to us. We're going to talk about that tonight, of someone who refused to defile himself. Now, when we think of the word defile, this is as good a time as any to bring this up. Really what that points us to is the biblical idea of holiness, right? You take something that is holy and treat it as ordinary, you have defiled it. And so Daniel understood, I serve a holy God. He has given holy commandments for my good, and he to go against those commandments. Remember at the foot of Mount Sinai, God says, "You will be to me a holy nation." And Daniel understood that in his heart and would refuse to behave in a way that would violate that principle. I also gave you Daniel chapter 2. We're not going to go through all 6 of these, but I just put this one up here as well because next week we're going to be reading and studying this, Daniel 2:44, in the days of those kings. We'll talk about which those kings are. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And so that's another verse that you can commit to memory. I know I encourage you to use whatever mnemonics, in other words, memory devices that you need to. It's a good exercise to do, okay? Maybe I don't think I can do this. With our kids, I use something and I'm ashamed to, I've given it a simple name because it was language that appealed to my kids. I called it the Lego method, and it's exactly what you think it is. And probably you've memorized verses that way. When I say Lego method, of course, you've got all different sizes of pieces, Lego pieces. You start with some small ones. You break up a verse like this. Okay, let's practice, in fact. Okay, don't look up here. I want you to, I'll say something and then you repeat after me. In the days of those kings, pretty good. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. Will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. I'm glancing down once in a while. I'm still working on this one, okay? In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. Now, we can take those pieces and put them together, hence the Lego method, and pretty soon you've got half this verse memorized, and that took maybe less than 2 minutes. Okay? I'm starting to appreciate that as you get older, your memory starts to go kaput. And for some of us, it's not in the cards genetically for us to maintain an able state of mind forever. So anyway, this is about much more than rote memorization, as you know. I mean, that's a significant passage in our Bibles. And even if you don't know it word for word, what you need to know is what the heart of the passage is teaching. Okay? And it's all part of writing God's truth on our hearts. So I thought, well, we can't not take 5 minutes and emphasize something that I preached for, I think it was 37 minutes on Sunday night. So you can add that to my bill. So, okay. Last time we talked about the significance of the book of Daniel. We're not going to rehash these points, but we've just got them up there on the screen. One that I'll emphasize again that we'll come to occasionally is, again, the meaning of Daniel's name really fits this story. God is my judge, and doesn't he live his life with a conviction in such a way that reflects a conviction in that truth? God is his judge. Nebuchadnezzar's not his judge. Daniel's friends behaved in that way as well. So we talked about that, and I hope that you're excited about the study ahead. Okay, as we move our attention to chapter 1, the first thing that I want to ask you is you have read chapter 1, hopefully. I'm just going to put this heading up here. This is, of course, one of the big themes. You could argue a primary theme of the book of Daniel, that God indeed rules in the kingdoms of men, the kingdoms of mankind. And so as you look at chapter 1, can you pick out some verses? And maybe for this, we just kind of rapid fire here. Pick out some verses that reinforce that theme, that speak to that theme, that draw an underline under that theme, that point to that God's in control. Verse 2, which says, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, etc., etc. You see the expression. Who gave Jehoiakim into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar? It was the Lord. Okay, we'll come back to that. Robbie's going to read here shortly. What else do you see? Verse 9. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. Now, there's something to be said about Daniel's role in currying favor with people in positions of authority. I dare say there's a point of application there for us today. But certainly, it could be said that Daniel partnered together with God in such a way where God could use that, leverage that, to help shape events after his purpose. What other verses do you see that point to our theme? Verse 17. As for these 4 youths, here's the same subject and verb. God gave, or God granted, them. Who's them? Daniel and his 3 friends. Knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Do you see any others? Not that you have to. Verse 21. Yeah, I had that one as well. Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. No, it does not say God granted that, but God most certainly did grant that. So, in chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, we're reminded that it was God who brought Nebuchadnezzar into power. Nebuchadnezzar had a role in that, didn't he? You could look at the history of this time period, the Battle of Carchemish in 605 and so forth. We could go back and trace the history of the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar, I think his name was, all of that. But ultimately, God has raised up the Babylonians. Now, there is an incredibly long list of passages here. I'm going to have Robbie read 3 of them. Much to Robbie's delight, it's not the whole list. We're going to start in Isaiah chapter 7. This is not one that Robbie's going to read, but since we're in Isaiah, I'm going to go ahead and read 7:3. Isaiah 7 and verse 3. Isaiah 7 and verse 3, Then the Lord said to Isaiah, Go out now to meet Ahaz, you and your son, Shear Jashub, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field. It just occurs to me that I'm missing my footnote here. Did not write it down thinking it was there. But if you study the meaning of that name, what we're pointing to here in all of this is God said beforehand, in any number of ways, I'm raising up the Babylonians. I'm sending my people into captivity. Now, Isaiah chapter 39. Isaiah 39. And we have a mic coming over your left shoulder there, Robbie. Thank you, Seth. Isaiah 39, and Robbie's going to read verses 5 through 8 whenever you're ready.
Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming, when all that is in your house, and that which your fathers have stored up till this day, shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And some of your own sons, who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the place of the king of Babylon. Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good, for he thought, There will be peace and security in my days.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. Isaiah prophesied in the 700 to 750 BC range. Hezekiah was king in Judah, right smack in the middle of that. Hezekiah reigned for 29 years, I believe, all told. And so we're talking well over 100 years before 605 BC, which is when the book of Daniel begins. And God here has identified Babylon by name. Who's the dominant world empire at this time? It's not Babylon. It's the Assyrians. And yet, he's already identified Babylon. We studied the book of Micah recently, Micah chapter 4, part of the burden that Micah related in his work. I've flown right by Micah. Chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. We're not going to read all of these. Now, why do you cry out loudly? Is there no king among you, or has your counselor perished, that agony has gripped you like a woman in childbirth? Writhe and labor to give birth, daughter of Zion, like a woman in childbirth. For now you will go out of the city, dwell in the field, and go where? To Babylon. Micah was a contemporary, as Tyler pointed out when he was teaching this, of Isaiah. So same time period. You go to Babylon, there you will be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. In fact, I have a hand note here, Isaiah 39, which we just read. Okay, a couple in Jeremiah here now that Robbie's going to read for us. Jeremiah, we'll start in chapter 20. We're just going to read those first two. Some of these other references in Jeremiah just happen to also be in the 4th year of Jehoiakim. And so if you want to jot those down, or I can give them to you later, or you can look them up yourself. Jeremiah does a lot of prophesying in the 4th year of this king. A lot of stuff is happening then. Robbie, go ahead and read Jeremiah chapter 20, verses 4 and 5.
For thus says the Lord, Behold, I will make you a terror to yourself and to all your friends. They shall fall by the sword of their enemies while you look on, and I will give all Judah into the hand of the king of Babylon. He shall carry them captive to Babylon, and shall strike them down with the sword. Moreover, I will give all the wealth of the city, all its gains, all its prized belongings, and all the treasures of the kings of Judah into the hand of their enemies, who shall plunder them and seize them and carry them into Babylon.
Okay, and then Jeremiah chapter 25. Jeremiah 25 and verses 8 through 11. I think on the slide I put 1 through 11, but just do 8 through 11. How's that?
Therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, because you have not obeyed my words, behold, I will send for all the tribes of the north, declares the Lord, and for Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all those surrounding nations I will devote them to destruction, and make them a horror, a hissing, and an everlasting desolation. Moreover, I will banish from them the voice of mirth, and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride, the grinding of the millstone, and the light of the lamp. This whole land shall become a ruin and a waste, and the nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years.
Okay, Jeremiah prophesied much closer to the time in which these prophecies were fulfilled, but still in advance. Nonetheless, you'll notice here in 25:9, he identifies Nebuchadnezzar as my servant. That, of course, would not be true in the sense that Nebuchadnezzar served the Lord from the heart, but rather that Nebuchadnezzar was a chosen instrument of God to carry out judgment against his people in complete accordance with what he had said he would do under the Old Covenant. I think Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy chapters 27 through 30. This is exactly what God promised in his covenant through Moses. This is exactly what the prophets, as you've just heard, predicted through the Spirit. The text says in Daniel 1, we can go ahead and just go over there now. In Daniel 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And verse 2 says, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands. So if Judah is placed in the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, that means Nebuchadnezzar has control. But who first had control to place it in his hand? The Lord. And that's simply the point we see emphasized again and again. From the opening couple of verses of this book, our theme, God rules in the kingdoms of mankind. And so here are the other ones that you mentioned. God grants Daniel favor with the commander. We're gonna talk about that shortly, hopefully. It is God who bestows these abilities on Daniel and his friends, and God allows Daniel to have a long life of service. Okay, so now we come to the text of chapter 1. We're going here to just try in very loose fashion to go through this text. We just read from the first couple of verses of Nebuchadnezzar taking this first, what was the first group of exiles to Babylon. This is when the clock begins, the 70 years. Again, 605 BC, approximately. What does Nebuchadnezzar take? As you look through verses 1 through 4, what are some of the things that he takes? Anyone? He takes what? Articles from the temple. He takes what else, or who else? Who's the king? Jehoiakim. That's how I'll pronounce his name. He takes the king. Actually, Jehoiakim ends up staying for a time. But then who else is taken to Babylon? Verse 3, the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring some of the sons of Israel, including, so that's a broader expression, some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles. So how broad was that spectrum of people? Don't know. They're all from the land, obviously, but the focus here in the text is obviously on those of nobility, the young people of nobility, of royal birth. I find it interesting that it says Nebuchadnezzar took the temple vessels. Those vessels were holy to the Lord. Those vessels will figure into the plot of the book of Daniel later on in chapter 5. God will kill a Babylonian king for using those vessels in a way that would defile their purpose. And yet, there seems to be a connection here between the vessels of the temple and these four young men. Because in effect, what is God preparing them as? As vessels for service. Over this 3-year period, God is preparing these four men, in effect, to function as vessels, much as he did Joseph, much as he did Esther and other people throughout the ages. We're introduced to Daniel and his friends here. We are told of their lineage. What do we know about the lineage of Daniel and his friends? We'll get to their names in a moment. They are from the tribe of Judah. Interesting, significant. Of course, that's the tribe of the Messiah. Roughly how old were they? We'd be speculating on an age range right there. We know, well, they're young enough to be called youths. We also know that they're young men or boys of considerable ability. So it's not unreasonable at all that all of that information zeroes us in on an age range of maybe mid to late teens, maybe even early 20s. I don't know. Not worth getting caught up in that. That's have my third or fourth kid. 3 of 4 kids have one of them's passing right through that age range right now. It is a challenging time in the parenting journey, or can be. Certainly has its ups and downs. It's a pivotal time in a young person's life, and we think, well, what a time for them to be stripped from everything that they know, that is taken from everything that is familiar, everything that they've ever known, and just be plunked into a foreign land. If that's you, how do you react to that? It might take you days to just come to terms with what's happened, because I'm sure this all happened in a blur. Whatever you envision for your life, maybe not far in advance of this point, then to realize, okay, now for the next 3 years, and I know likely longer than that, Daniel knowing the text like he did, everything he'd envisioned for his life has gone by the boards. So it's helpful for us to, it's easy to just read this and, oh yes, of course, Daniel did the right thing, but I hope that you're moving forward in your mind to how we might apply that to ourselves today. Let's talk for a moment about the abilities that these young men had. And there's an interesting contrast here in how they are viewed by the Babylonians versus how I think it is implied they are viewed by God. Through Nebuchadnezzar's eyes, what does he see? Give me some traits. Outward appearance. The text says they're good looking. We are left as readers to imagine what that means. I think the implication is they're also healthy. It says there is no defect. These young men are of full health and ability. And what else do we know about them? They're smart. They're really smart. What else? Wise. Wise beyond their years. And that's before God bestows special abilities upon them. Although God gave them what they had at this point, true enough. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. God is in complete control of this. He knows down to the last detail what will happen, the order in which it will happen. So these young men are good looking. They are healthy. They show intelligence in every branch of wisdom. They are endowed with understanding. They are, the text says, discerning in knowledge. The text further says they have ability for serving, whatever that means. When they look at them, they see potential. These young men would be great serving in the king's court. They were making that connection. What did that mean? What would that look like? What specific abilities were they thinking of? Not sure. But I guess here's one of the points anyway to be drawn from this. Those things are not what make young people exceptional today, any more than that's what makes young people exceptional then. Now, those are great things. Those are traits I think we would all like for our kids to have. And yet, what made Daniel exceptional in the sight of God? Not to minimize all the things we've just mentioned, because God gave all of those things to Daniel. But what stands out the most about Daniel? His heart, his faith. Kyle? The choices he made in advance. Daniel 1 and verse 8. He was a young man of considerable resolve. So, it sends you down a line of thought that we're not going to take time with here, but I'll just plant this thought. How do we regard young men and women of that age? What potential do we think they have? How would we have thought of Daniel had he lived in our time? What would we have expected of him? God places a lot of people in the world in positions of trust and authority, and often in history he has used young men and women for that very purpose. These youths were to be taught, trained. Again, we've mentioned a 3-year training regimen that included food requirements, that included what else? What kind of training? Okay, to know the language, to know the laws, good. To know the literature, culture, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to be trained over a 3-year period. They're taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans. So that would have been from 605 to 602. There's this daily ration. And then, after that period of time, they would enter into the king's service. And so there's quite an investment in these young men. We are told in the text that their names are changed. Here are their Babylonian names. Did you look up, besides Daniel, did you look up the meanings of the names? I actually don't have them in front of me. Just curious. So you have Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and those are named respectively Shadrach, Meshach, and it is not Abednego. It's Abednego. You'll find all 3 of those young men were given Babylonian names named after Babylonian deities. And the same is true of Daniel, Belteshazzar. May Bel protect him, B-E-L. So they are given new names that they're named after Babylonian deities. But the fact that they're given Babylonian names does not change the core of who they are. They still serve the one, the true, the only living God. Thoughts or comments before we really zoom in here on Daniel 1:8 and some of the lessons that we learn from him? Okay, well, let's look in the text here. It says in Daniel 1 and verse 8 that Daniel displayed a certain resolve. It says, but Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So, who's the first person he talks to about this? He seeks permission from the commander of the officials. Now, we've already been introduced to him. In my Bible, he is called in verse 3, Ashpenaz. What does that suggest to us about the relationship that Daniel has forged with this man? The very man who, by the way, I mean, let's be clear, he has a heavy responsibility upon him. In fact, we learn later, as Ashpenaz opens up to him, that he's exceedingly afraid of what Daniel has, at the thought of letting these four take a different route here. His neck is on the line. If he does, this is a 3-year investment. If these young men are not ready to be examined by the king, this man believes that his life is forfeited. So the stakes could not be higher for him. And so, I mean, we could see a man in that circumstance not even be willing to give a person like Daniel a hearing, not be willing to entertain any conversation, not allow. It would almost seem that they have somewhat of an informal friendship here. I wouldn't be dogmatic about that. But talk to me about this relationship that Daniel has forged with this man, this person of authority. And furthermore, what we might learn from that today. I'm going to bring you a mic. Sorry. You guys don't know what to. Sometimes I just let you talk. And then... Go ahead, Peggy. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I said, again, we see God's hand in this. He caused this good relationship to happen between the official and Daniel. We don't know to what extent that went to, but it caused the official to listen to Daniel's question about, can we change this somewhat?
Yeah.
Can we prove that we can do this in a manner that's pleasing to God and pleasing to our beliefs?
Yeah.
And come out on the better end of it.
Excellent. There are some layers to this. We have a comment over here, Titus. Allison.
This relationship Daniel has with the eunuch reminds me also of the story of Esther, where we read that she had a similar good relationship with those who were in charge of her, and she asked them for advice, and then she followed their advice, and that was part of how she developed that good reputation. So I think both of them are great examples of folks who were in a situation and they could have been like rebellious and resentful because they were there against their will, but instead they made the most of it and they still put in effort to build these relationships, and it paid off.
That's a great point. I mean, he could, from day one, Daniel could have been a hothead, right? You've taken me from my home. I couldn't celebrate my 16th birthday. We don't really know how old he was. I mean, come on. But I mean, young people have quite a capacity for bitterness, and that path can be very, very short. And he could have rationalized, you know what? I'm going to fight this every step of the way. I'm not going to learn the language of a pagan people. I'm not going to learn the culture of a pagan people. I'm not going to cooperate in any way. Daniel didn't do that, did he? It's clear he was respectful, right? And so when the moment of need arose, what did Daniel have with this man? He had influence to be able to entreat him and to seek out what I'll call a win-win situation, which we'll talk about in a moment. Go ahead, Drew. That's okay. Okay, fair enough.
This guy actually says no.
Here's the mic.
Oh, sorry. It looks like this guy actually says no.
He does initially. Go on.
And so then perhaps in verse 11, maybe it seems like he asks a different person. And I think what that underscores is certainly his willingness to
You're right.
have a relationship and go do this.
Yeah.
but I think it underscores his resolve
Yeah.
that he's told no by this authority figure of, hey, sorry, man, that actually is going to come back on me. And he says, I'm so resolved about this, I need to go ask the next person. So that seems
right.
important.
That's a good correction. Verse 11, Drew rightly points out. So the commander of the officials is the person we've been talking about. And so initially he does in fact reject Daniel. And so Daniel is pivots in a wise way to someone else under his charge, presumably. And I think the same point would apply, right? What kind of relationship has he developed with this person? There's a relationship here where influence, vital influence, is going to be wielded, and so that the application points remain. But that's correct. Portland?
I think right off of that point as well, and not to get too far ahead of you on your question later about raising our children, but it stands out to me that he didn't hide, right? He actually asked in a position of underneath authority. He said, instead of just hiding this, instead of just not eating, not defiling myself in that way, I'm going to actually ask. And I'm going to step up and say, hey, this is something that I stand for. Do you mind if this is a behavior that I partake in? And I think that's a big deal when it comes to raising children in the faith of, hey, this is the way that we're going to ask, but you still need to ask permission. You need to be okay with the decisions that you're making, but there's still people in charge of you here.
Very good. Notice I think we see Daniel's trust in all of this. We see his resolve. We see his boldness. But to that point about a win-win, verse 12, he proposes a situation that this person could be comfortable with that would minimize the risk for him, right? Because his neck's on the line. And so it's a 3-year regimen, so 10 days seems like, just to my ears, would seem like a relatively low risk here. Let's give it a testing period. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food. And then he says, and deal with your servants according to what you see. Now, what is Daniel doing? He's saying, okay, I'm going to let you decide. Deal with us according to what you see. It's at that moment where he is putting his faith completely in God. I find that impressive. Jim?
Yeah, it's interesting. What I like about the story as you framed it so far is that there's this co-laboring, right, between God and Daniel from the standpoint of God has put him in a position, he's equipped him, he surrounded him with relationships. It's interesting to see how he had this back and forth with the chief of the eunuchs. Didn't work out so good, even though it says that God had already put him in favor with him. Mm-hmm. He went to someone else within that circle of authority, just under the eunuchs, and did get permission. And so it just, to me, it portrays how God will put us in positions to do his will, but we have to take action. We have to be involved.
Walk by faith. In
that, right? And it's kind of like if we'll step up, God will step in to some degree, I think. And that follows along with Esther. Remember when Esther was told, look, if you don't do this, God will find somebody else to do it?
Right.
I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those that are in God's will, right? They're doing his will.
Right.
And so I'm getting this sense of a co-laboring scenario here.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you agree with that, but
absolutely.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
It's God's the master orchestrator, but Daniel recognizes on some level, at the very least, his responsibility to stand upon what he knows and to trust God for the rest. Nisi?
I was also thinking that, the food could seem like a little thing. He didn't, Daniel wanted to not defile himself. And the food seems like it could be something small, and so I think of the principle that when you are faithful in the little, God will give you more. And we see that throughout the book of Daniel, that he's faithful in all the little things, and then, of course, he will be faithful in the big things.
Yeah, good. Good. What passage did you mention, Kyle? 3:20, now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above, a Pauline triple, above all that we ask or think. To him be the glory in the church. So there's a lot of powerful things to notice about this text. Somewhat in review here. I'll just put these up here. I hope I don't know that we need to spend a long time on this question. Titus, go. Oh, yes. Go ahead, Chandler. Sorry. You're trying to get my attention. Go ahead.
One other thing that I really like about what Jim was saying is that in this co-worker type scenario of us and God, yes, we do need to take action. And I also see in the way that he positions this trial period that he's also leaving room for God to act. I think oftentimes when we have resolved and we think we really need to show our faith and stand up for something, you can think about how we could have, stood on the table and, kicked the food off the table and saying, I'm not going to do this, you're doing wrong. But I just think about the humility that he shows, not just to the person that he's asking this for, but the humility he shows before God to say, I'm going to take this move and out of faith, and I'm also going to leave room for you to do the work. And I think the respect that he shows, the humility he shows to the people he's working with, I think is a really important thing for us to consider in thinking that we're not doing the work for God and we're taking it 100% of the way, and that means we need to, be boisterous and inflammatory. I think the humility makes a really big difference in allowing God to do the work as well.
I have every reason to believe, knowing what we know about Daniel, that all of this was accompanied with prayer. That the kind of habit he has in chapter 6 wasn't cultivated in a night. It was cultivated over a lifetime, and so that mold is established early on. I hope we can appreciate how this particular chapter is vital, important to the rest of the book and setting the stage. Right, we're introduced to Nebuchadnezzar and of course, to Daniel and his three friends. And the main premise of the book is set forth very strongly. As we think of some specific ways that we can imitate Daniel, we see a wisdom in this young man of deciding what stands are worth taking, and in taking those stands, making up one's mind not to be defiled. And every bit of this translates to today. Earning influence with authority figures. That is timely. Should we be hotheads and rebellious in spirit? Maybe God would like to use us, but we make ourselves odious to people we disagree with because of how we engage with them. Seeking win-win scenarios. Learning the wisdom and education of the world. Just to name a few. Other thoughts about Daniel 1 and some ways possibly we could apply the principles from this chapter to our lives today. Okay. Going, gone. That's all I have for tonight. I think this is probably as good a place as any to just hit the pause button, go ahead and be reading over chapter 2, and God willing,